Thank you, Anuja, for that's a very fulsome, gushing introduction. I think I'll quote that next time somebody slags me off on Lib Dem Voice. Anyway, good evening, everyone. When it comes to the way that the education system has failed people who are disadvantaged, we know that this has been going on since time immemorial. It was the case before the national curriculum and after the national curriculum. It was the case before grant-maintained schools, before academies, and before free schools, and is the case now as well. And but yet, when we all know, and I think take it for granted, hopefully, that there's a big problem about the education system's results and you know, the damage that we see on our streets with young people continually sucked into criminality and a life of destruction. But at the same time, when it comes to disadvantage, clearly in the education system, some people are more disadvantaged than others, and we see that in the tables of ethnicity when it comes to achievement, exam result achievement. And that has been, again, the case for a very, very long time. So these are not new issues at all. There's been many studies done over very long periods of time, going all the way back to the Swan Report, I think sometime in the 70s when I was in short trousers, all the way to very recent reports by the Runnymede Trust and by government itself. You know, despite the fact that the Labour government threw huge amounts of money at the education as a whole, many of those inequalities remains, and even though the gaps sometimes between different races and nationalities have reduced, they haven't reduced nearly enough, I think, in comparison to the amount of money which has you know, been directed towards trying to solve the problem. And I'll give you an example. Obviously, gypsies and travellers have been mentioned, and black communities. There was actually a 28 percentage point gap between African Caribbean pupils and the white average when it comes to attaining 5 good GCSEs, which are obviously A star to C. That means that 40% of African and Caribbean pupils actually leave school without that benchmark of good qualifications, which I think is a real badge of shame on the education system. And sadly, there's been too little debate about this. Even, you know, within the Liberal Democrats, there's far too little debate. I was listening to David Laws give a speech yesterday, no mention of that. He gave a fringe meeting this morning as well. I don't know if any of you were there. Again, there was no mention of it. And even when it comes to tomorrow, we're debating a report on, it's called Tackling Inequality. There's only one fleeting mention of race in the whole report. You know, we really are assuming that our policies will, when it comes to tackling disadvantage, will affect all disadvantaged communities and all people equally. And you know, history has shown that with many initiatives that Labour did in the past, it hasn't had the desired effect. So we do need to really start to recognise race and put race back on the agenda and not be so colourblind. Now, I don't know when some of you actually saw, those of you from London, the London Evening Standard last week. They did about 4 or 5 pages on the difficulties that young black and Asian and ethnic minority people face in getting work, and clearly this is reminiscent of the generation, or my generation, when we actually left school and university, and there were no jobs out there, and this is a repetition of that. And I see with people that I know, that I grew up with, people who've never got on the career ladder as a result of actually being disadvantaged and being denied the opportunities when it came to entering the world of work. I mean, 55% of black boys or young men are actually unemployed right now. 55%, which is actually equivalent to the unemployment rate of Greece or Spain right now. This is what we are dealing with, and it's storing up a huge powder keg for the future. But I believe that when it comes to looking at why that's the case, it's not just about the recession, because disproportionate unemployment has risen dramatically for the black population, but it also has its roots in the education system as well. And it's an education system that is not just failing young people today, but it's actually failed their parents as well. And their parents, despite sometimes their high expectations within education of their pupils, of their children, they themselves actually feel intimidated by the school system, do not engage properly with the school system because they've had the same experiences. And this is again something that we need to be tackling. So I'm not saying that the problem is just with the school and teachers, and that it's a culture of division. It's not about that. It's actually about the reality of how we actually get whole families to engage in the system as well. Because certainly when it comes to traditional African approach to education, it's about raising. It takes a village to raise a child, and if we can't actually get more adults involved in young people's education, then I think we really are heading down the wrong road. But of course, it is also about the white working class too. And this morning, David Laws, I asked him a question about the gap, the attainment gap between races, and he said, well, actually, the real problem, or the main problem, is actually about white working class boys. And of course, there is a huge problem there. There always has been. We know about the problems that Britain has when it comes to social mobility. We know how hard it is to break down those glass ceilings when it comes to class. Those concrete ceilings in many ways. But this government itself actually has taken out the socio-economic duty out of the Equalities Act. So if we want to be tackling the problems that we have with white working class boys succeeding or failing in the education system, we need to actually have a holistic view right across policy about making sure that we actually keep socio-economic issues on the agenda. But although white working classes are failing in the education system, when it comes to many black communities, not all, but many black communities, we're not just talking about the black working class, we're talking about the black middle class as well. We're talking about families who have actually come from a very middle class background. I mean, my mother actually came from a middle class background in Africa, and she ended up working her life as a cleaner. It doesn't mean she was working class, but she brought the middle class values with her to Britain. I wanted to also come on to the fact now that we are increasingly seeing, and I'm hearing these stories about families actually giving up on the British education system. That if they have any means, they are actually sending their children back home to Africa or the Caribbean, or they are homeschooling, or they are actually investing in supplementary schools, which are still underfunded. They were underfunded under Labour government, they were underfunded today with local authorities who are not funding them, or funding them only by a few £1,000s a year. This is a symptom of the fact that there's a wider recognition of the intrinsic problems when it comes to educating black children. And I think that it's not just about diversifying the curriculum. I think we do need to diversify the curriculum, and I think that point that was made was absolutely correct. But I think it's also about recognising that we need to empower young people. We need to treat them, we need to not control them within the education system. Obviously they need to be well behaved, but I think there's a difference between control and empowerment, so that they recognise that they are valued citizens, that they can make a contribution to society, because there are people like them who have made a contribution to society, British society, and internationally before. And quite often, young people don't often recognise that. But I don't believe that there are young people going around shooting or stabbing themselves who actually have a knowledge of where they come from and who they are. The only people doing that, creating madness in the community, on the streets, are those people who lack that particular knowledge. And this is, I think, why we need to imbue that within the education system. So it is about cultural education for all those reasons, but also as an armoury to protect them in the wider world, where they actually know that they are going to be encountering racism. And we need to actually think about this from a psychological point of view as well. And that psychological point of view, I think, is that too many young black kids actually see the education, the schooling system in the same frame of mind as they actually see the criminal justice system They see an attempt to try and control them, to try and neuter them, and to assimilate them as well. Now, we don't often talk about assimilation because it's like an unfashionable word now. We don't even talk about tolerance now. We talk about cohesion, we talk about multiculturalism. But I think that when it comes to behind the school walls, assimilation rules. And this is one of the problems that we actually have. I'll just give you an example of that. When I worked for the Black Press a few years ago, I covered a case of two African Caribbean young men in their sixth form, I think. And they were excluded, permanently excluded for getting tram lines in their hair. Tram lines, I'm sure you know, are basically lines which have been cut in to their afro hair. They appealed over and again and they didn't get anywhere. But they did what most people don't do, which is actually take the issue to court. When they took the issue to court, what came up was that there was an Irish boy who came in celebrating St. Patrick's Day by having bright green hair. And that was okay, he wasn't disciplined at all, because the teacher said, well, actually, that's about his cultural expression. But yet, there seemed to be almost this feeling that if black children treat their hair and express themselves through their hair, that somehow the school is going to go all ghetto, and it's all going to, it's all going to end up a big mess. And I think the boys actually won their case, but I think that for me, and maybe this is just my interpretation, maybe it's different from everyone else's, but I felt that the significance of that win was that there was almost a recognition that black hair was actually part of a black person. And that just having the black equivalent of the short back and sides, while everyone else is allowed to adapt their hairstyle, I think is a very significant issue. It's not just about hair, it's also about the respecting those young people for who they are. And just one final point, that's why I'm absolutely fully behind the issue about the Learners' Charter, which has been proposed in the Race Equality Task Force that we're getting involved in. I know that Andrew had some concerns about that actually being bureaucratic, but actually I think that what the Learners' Charter, which was proposed by Professor Gus Joel, one of my heroes, actually really symbolises is it actually symbolises a contract which is about respect for that young individual, which flows both ways. It's about teachers respecting that young children and enabling that young child to learn when it comes to individuality. Because everyone learns in different ways. And if the curriculum, as it is designed, is actually designed it's actually designed for particular people, to be honest, to achieve in the system, then we need to find other ways of doing it. But those young people also need to know, 1 minute, 30 seconds actually, those young people need to know that they are respected, but they also need to give respect as well. And if that's actually embodied in a contract, then I think that that's a real way forward. Thank you.